on the Lowdown, a Down autism podcast, Mary Cardle gives us the lowdown on parenting a child with Down syndrome and autism as a single mother. Over to you, Hannah Marla.
Thank you, Danielle. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LowDOWN podcast. My name is Hina Mahmood. I am the Senior Occupational Therapist at the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation, and joining me is my wonderful co-host, Marla Folden, who is a speech-language pathologist at the DSRF. Hi, Marla.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Oh, it's a good day.
Good.
Middle of summer. Loving it.
I know. The weather's getting, January has subsided,
over.
and now the hot temperatures are setting in, and all right. So before we continue on with our episode, we would love for you to hit that subscribe button and leave a review of our podcast on your chosen podcast platform. Remember to check out our episode pages for additional resources related to each episode. You can also follow the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation at www.dsrf.org and on Instagram and Twitter by following at DSRF Canada. So today we are very, very pleased to bring you our second installment of the LowDOWN podcast's Family Spotlight. And we have the pleasure of speaking to one amazing mom who is also a fellow podcaster. She has a wonderful 8-year-old daughter with Down syndrome and a very unique and inspiring family story.
Mary Cardle is who we get to talk to today, and she's a single mom by choice living in Burnaby in BC with her beautiful daughter Ainsley. Between spending time with her favorite girl and working, she loves to bake and knit and trail run and go glamping. I'm all in for that. Mary's also the creator and host of the T21 Mom podcast. It's all about Down syndrome. I recommend you give that a listen as well, for sure. Mary's hoping to have some big trips in the near future, after pandemic and all that, with Ainsley, going to Europe and maybe down under. And she loves to bake chocolate chip cookies with Ainsley. Of course, Ainsley loves the chocolate chips. And they like swimming, playing at the park, and spending time with Dennis and her cousins. Welcome to the Lowdown, Mary.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We are delighted to have you with us today, for sure.
Yeah, it's nice to have you on the other side of the mic.
Yeah.
Because Mary's been gracious enough to have us on her podcast. So it's really fun to kind of have you back and
reciprocate. So we always start with our 5 secret questions, so that everybody gets to know you. Everyone's nervous for this part.
Yes.
It's not a huge deal. The first question is, what are you currently reading and or listening to that you enjoy?
I don't have a lot of time to read, but I am reading. I've just started. It's Sharing Love Abundantly with Special Needs Families. It's about the 5 love languages. So So it was originally, the book was the 5 love languages, but now it's been adapted to families with children with special needs. So
that is, I want to get my hands on that.
Yeah, it's a small little book, so hopefully I can get through it pretty quick.
Yeah.
And I also love to listen to podcasts, obviously, for LowDOWN, for sure. And I love The Dark Poutine. It's a true crime Canadian podcast.
Okay.
All about
I was
it.
like, what is that about? Okay. Cooking?
Also, I think what we'll do is we'll put a link to that book on our episode page, because I think a lot of other families would want to,
absolutely
to check that book out as well.
A lot of people know about the 5 love languages, but this is so applicable and so neat.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Very cool.
The second question, if you could instantly learn another language, no effort required, what would you want to just learn and then be able to go there and have a great time?
Well, probably Japanese, actually. I lived in Japan for a couple of years. So I think, my Japanese is pretty rusty, but if I could instantaneously speak
just Japanese,
pick it up. That would be the bomb.
That's
awesome.
And then it just makes traveling so much easier. Oh, it would be so nice.
Yeah. Oh, Japan. I had no idea you lived in Japan for 2 years. That's so cool.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
Many years ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
right after I finished university.
Oh,
I
okay.
literally, I think it was 9 days.
Got it.
I got on
I'm
a plane
out.
and went there. I didn't know, I think I knew 7 words when I got off the plane in Japanese, and that was it. And it was an amazing 2 years.
That is brave.
I've heard only the best about Japan. Everyone that goes there is just raving about it. So that's very cool. Okay, question number 3. What is something from your childhood that you still love today? Could be anything. It could be a food
that I still love today. I love decorating Christmas cookies.
Yeah.
I remember doing that as a kid with my mom and my siblings, and I've carried on that tradition with my nieces and with Ainsley and my friends. And, I'm sure that's sort of where my love of cookies came from.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love doing that. It just I just remember Christmas, and it's all those traditions, and I just love that.
Love it. And can we give a plug in to your amazing cookies? Because
I was just going to say, and they're awesome.
It's called Miss Ace Cookies, I think, right?
Yes, that's right. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, not always very active there, but, because you can only show so many pictures of cookies, but hey, but yes, I do a lot of my baking. My cookies is to raise funds for the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation for the run up for Down syndrome. So I'm more than happy to bake somebody any kind of cookie that they like.
Yeah, they're very, very, very good.
Thank you.
Okay, question number 4. What was the best advice that you ever received? And it could be, like I said, in any area of life.
Oh gosh, that's a bit of a tough one. The best advice, I remember many, many years ago, my mom, I don't know if it's really advice, but she just said, life isn't always fair. I remember I didn't get selected to go on the French exchange, but all my friends got selected. And I was quite upset by that. And I've kind of always carried that through with me. Just, sometimes like life just isn't fair, but you deal with it and move on.
Yeah. You can't always get what you want. Isn't that like a Rolling Stones thing or something?
I think so.
Well, funny that you say that, because shortly after I learned that Ainsley had Down syndrome, it was a prenatal diagnosis, and that song came on the radio. And the line was, you can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need.
Yeah.
And
I bet that was meaningful at the time.
Very
sure.
was. Yeah. And still to this day.
Yeah.
So,
that's
my
awesome.
mom used to sing that to me. Mom, if you're listening, I remember anytime things didn't go my way, she would sing it at me. Usually about very trivial things, but
But still, well, it's stuck with both of you, so it must have made an impact if you still remember it to this day. So moms are right. Moms are right about that. Okay, so our last question. So you mentioned that you wanted to go traveling, but look, what is one thing that you're looking forward to doing post-pandemic that is just like one of those little things that you weren't able to do?
Oh my gosh, I'm just so looking forward to having my family over and having a barbecue and having my friends over, because pretty much haven't seen anybody. And, and it's been hard. Like my aunt, she has some medical issues, so I haven't seen her in almost a year. And that's been tough. So that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, exactly.
Things are kind of calming down a little bit more.
Yes, I know. The light is at the end of the tunnel, so we're just
so close. That's right.
So great. Okay, well, great. Thank you for indulging in that. That was really fun. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your family and your lovely daughter, Ainsley, who Marla and I have had the pleasure of working with?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, as Marla mentioned, I am a single mom by choice. And that means that I decided to have a child on my own. And I was an older mom, but Down syndrome wasn't really in the forefront of my mind. But I found out at about, if I remember, it was Mother's Day, and I had just announced to my family, and I was so nervous about telling them that I was about to have a child, I on my own, that I was pregnant. Everyone was so excited. And I remember one of my sister-in-laws asked me, "Are you worried?" And I said, "No, not really." The doctor said, it's about 6 to 9% chance that I might have a child with Down syndrome. And initially I thought that was high, but he said, think of it the other way, like 91% chance that everything's fine. And I said, no, not really. Someone's in that 6 to 9%. You just hope it's not you. And then 2 days later, I got a phone call.
Uncanny. Oh my goodness.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah. And then 2 days later, I got a phone call that kind of changed my life, that, the doctor wanted to see me. And when I went, she told me that I had a 1 in 5 chance of my child having Down syndrome. And as I'm sure every parent who has had either a prenatal or a birth diagnosis, like, you're devastated. I thought my life was over. I mean, I didn't even have an official diagnosis, but I went for an amnio.
But it gets very real. Yeah.
And it's weird. I just kind of knew. I just kind of already knew that, my baby was going to have Down syndrome. And, you know, I remember the day that I got the call, like I knew which day it was going to be. And I had a friend come and stay with me, and I figured they would give the, in quotes, bad news calls in the morning. But the morning sort of passed and I hadn't heard anything. And then we're getting ready to go out for brunch and I missed a call. And I called that number back and I held my breath and I leaned over the counter, and I can't even really remember what she said, but I think she said, you know, your baby has trisomy 21. And I probably thanked her and hung up the phone.
Yeah.
I don't really remember anything beyond that.
Yeah.
And then I just had a really ugly cry, and my friend let me have that moment. And then we had a hug, went for breakfast, and went maternity clothes shopping. And it was sort of surreal, because I should have been so ecstatic, but it's trying to process everything. It was really challenging. But I had a really wonderful village who surrounded me, who supported me, you know, because it was tough. Like, you know, it took me a while to come to acceptance, but I finally found a way to get there. And a friend of mine who unfortunately wasn't able to have children, she had been with me through the whole getting pregnant process, and, you know, as I did IVF. And I remember when I had gone to the doctor at the 8-week appointment, she came with me and the doctor confirmed that I was pregnant, and, you know, we hugged and we're both crying, and I'm crying because I'm so happy that I'm finally having a baby. And I'm sure she was crying for the same reason, but also that she couldn't have a child. But I asked her to be my birth partner. So, you know, yes. So my good friend Marcy, she was my birth partner. And, you know, after, I don't know, 22 hours of labor, I can't even remember now. I had Ainsley. I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. I was secretly hoping for a girl because I grew up with brothers. 3 brothers, and I always wanted a sister. And I ended up having to have a C-section. And the doctors were all great. They were, you know, they were prepared because they knew that she was going to have Down syndrome. And then when they held her up, we're looking to see, like, what is it? And then they finally announced it's a girl. And then they told me she was 9'1". And I said, thank God I had a C-section. And, you know, we did have an extended stay in hospital for 26 days. No real health issues, just low oxygen saturation levels. And she has a healthy heart. And it was weird because, like, I kind of knew that she had Down syndrome before the amnio. And then when we went to do the heart scan, the echocardiogram, I kind of just knew her heart was going to be okay. I can't explain how I know these things. Yeah. I just knew. Yeah. And, you know, we have an amazing village. My family is amazing. They have all embraced and loved her. And, I've met an amazing man named Dennis, who, when I finally told him that Ainsley has Down syndrome, he didn't even blink. Perfect. You know, he never batted an eye, and those two are as thick as thieves and, you know, like 2 peas in a pod, and they just absolutely love each other. And, you know, I feel really fortunate that I met somebody like Dennis who is so accepting, because we all know that people are scared of what they don't know.
Yeah. Right? It doesn't always turn out that way. Yeah.
And, you know, and often people, they're scared of Down syndrome. Like, I've heard of lots of stories where partners have just left and, you know, without even giving a chance. And Dennis accepted her before even officially meeting her. And, you know, they're pretty much inseparable now. So,
that's great.
Yeah. So we, you know, it's been an amazing journey for sure. It's hard at times, you know, and I was doing everything on my own. It's tough. It's really hard, but you know, I've had a great group of people support me. We have great, you know, awesome resources like the DSRF, and I guess that's pretty much my little story.
Yeah.
Did it strike you? I mean, in your extended hospital stay, you're there and you need to be there. It's the O2 sats and whatever, but you're like, also, this is just a baby. Like, this is just my baby. And Down syndrome is a piece of the puzzle, but mostly she's just my baby. Did that strike you at all? That
Yes. And I mean, we had so many specialists look at her, and and then we spent a week at Children's, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. And of course, babies with Down syndrome, they have a hard time feeding because of their tone. And I remember it would take an hour to feed
very
her,
hard.
and then I have to pump. And then it was like, you
just
before
never
I know
sleep.
it's another half hour before I can feed her. It was insanity at best, but it was hard. And and I remember they had a group of medical students that wanted to, I guess, look at her because they don't get a lot of children with Down syndrome. And I said, that's fine, but I don't want her to be poked and prodded, because she's my baby.
Exactly.
She's not just this strange anomaly.
Right.
And I totally get that they don't see that very often. And I'm all about let's support and so that they can learn.
Exactly.
But at the same time, I just wanted to get home. And 26 days, it felt like an eternity. I mean, now it's nothing, but it did at the time. I thought, I just want to get home.
You haven't had any, you've just had a baby and you haven't slept.
And you're and you're on your own. You don't have someone
Tag
supporting
team.
you, tag teaming it out. So that can be very difficult.
It was challenging. But
when you got that Down syndrome diagnosis, were you like, okay, I'm going to read everything I know about it? Or were you of the mind that I'm just going to take it as it comes and learn as I go? Like where were you at when you knew that you were going to have a little one with Down syndrome?
Oh, I'm all about, I need to know.
Yeah.
And so literally the next day I was at work and I'm calling the National Down Syndrome Society because I didn't know about the DSRF. And I don't even know to this day how they even understood me because I was crying so hard and it was just a voice message, but somehow they understood my name and my address. And about a week later, I got a package of information and a book called Gifts. And I couldn't read the book right away. I started, but it was still too fresh because I was, it's like 17 weeks at that point, 18 weeks.
Yep.
And, but I did read it later on in my pregnancy. And there were a few single parents, but not for the same reason as myself. But after I read those stories, that's kind of when I felt like it's going to be okay. It's just a slightly different road, but it's going to be okay. And then just as a little side note, like a few years later, it was the 10th anniversary of the book Gifts. And then they had a call out for stories. And I thought, well, I kind of have a little bit of unique story. And so I submitted mine and it was picked, and it was the only Canadian picked. So, so I'm quite proud of that actually.
I didn't know you were in that book.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think you might have one in the library here.
I think we do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it was, wasn't it compiled by, I think, a mom whose son used to come to the DSRF. I can't remember now. But there was, I might be getting them confused, but it's a lovely book. It's something that every parent that has a kiddo with Down syndrome has read and loved. So,
Yes, I quite enjoyed the short little stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
It is so interesting to me that getting this information before your child is born is a huge deal. You cannot deny it at all. And yet there are other people who find out these things afterward, or they find it out when their kid is 2 or 4 and they don't know this information. And it seems like it doesn't matter when the information comes to you. The idea of a different road is, it's blindsiding. You know what I mean? It just takes you, and I think how do you feel about knowing it before Ainsley was born? Because you haven't held her yet. You don't, it's like, it's not a wedge, but it's in there before you even get that chance to have a relationship.
Oh, I'm so glad I had a prenatal diagnosis. And it seems like every parent I talk to, however they get their diagnosis, they always say it's the better way.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have done well with a birth diagnosis because just the expectations. I've read, because I had a chance to find out about Down syndrome. I had a chance to prepare. I got connected with a great pediatrician that we still go to, all of these things. Like if I didn't have that information beforehand, I think I would have been scrambling. I'm on my own, I think at that point I'd be thinking my world really is over, but I had time to just really go through the emotions and plan. And yeah, for me, it was definitely better.
Sort of reconcile and be ready.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Had you ever met somebody with Down syndrome before?
A little bit. When I worked at the aquarium, there was a young man named Winston, and he worked as a volunteer there. But really, that was generally my only real interactions. I would see a few people with Down syndrome in the community, like at church, and I would see them at Safeway often, because I think they're fantastic, because I often see them employing people with different abilities there. So, but that was it, like I really didn't know anyone. And again, that's where I think people get scared, is because they haven't had that chance to interact with someone with Down syndrome.
And sometimes I wonder too, because there are people with Down syndrome around in the same way that there's people with other differences around, but you might not notice unless somebody's having a really hard time, you know? So when people are aware that there's somebody who's a bit different, it's probably when they're having a meltdown or whatever. So that's what they remember is like this really hard moment from somebody else's life. And then you kind of are like, oh, okay, maybe people are like that, but that's not representative of who they are. You know what I mean? That people are catching our students at the wrong moment, instead of seeing them employed at Safeway and having a good time just living their lives.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. We've talked a little bit about your diagnosis. I want to hear a little bit about how Ainsley is now, because she's not a baby anymore. She's much, middle of elementary school. And so tell us about Ainsley now.
Ainsley's 8 and she's in grade 3. And, she's doing amazing. She was diagnosed with the dual diagnosis of autism at about 5.5. And it was delivered so horribly that it was almost as bad as the Down syndrome diagnosis. The doctor was very defeating, and it was just horrible the way it was given to me. And he even said to me verbatim, don't bother teaching her the ABCs or the niceties such as please and thank you, because they don't mean anything to her. Yes. And I don't know if he meant don't ever. I hope that's not what he meant. But I thought, she already knows her ABCs at the time. She just gonna say, and I just felt as a parent so defeated. I go, I just spent all this time teaching her this, and you're telling me don't bother. Yeah. And I was so angry, and I get a message from them the next day, I think it was, but it took me a month before I could respond. And I said, why would you tell me this? Why would the doctor say this? It's terrible. And, that gave her such a low cognitive age. And I knew it wasn't right. And I remember our support worker, it's really only till age 3, but she kind of sort of stayed around because Ainsley went to the same daycare that she supported. And she brought something up that I thought was very interesting. And it was a while after the diagnosis. She said, I've been thinking about it, but you know how Ainsley is, whenever she meets somebody new, she plays them. And I think that's what happened during the assessment, because it totally made sense, because it's somebody new. Why am I going to do anything for you? But, she's been thriving really well with her various different therapies, which I'm so happy to see. And the developmental pediatrician did tell me that, the other doctor at the assessment, and said, you'll see great strides over the next year. And that is true. And she's learning to read. And then this past year, something kind of really exciting happened. And I got a message from her EA, who has been with her since kindergarten. It's unfortunately her last year that she'll be with Ainsley. But she sent me a message, said, I need to tell you something. You probably already know this. I go, no, I don't know anything. And she goes, I'm shaking. And she said, Ainsley can do simple math. She's spelling words. And I go, what? Math was not even on the radar. I was hopeful that maybe at some point we'll learn to spell. My goal was more reading. And she sent me this list of all these words, and they were words that we don't even practice on our flashcards. And that she is like doing basic math. And I go, I don't know where that came from because we're not doing it at home. And so that was so exciting for me because, when we had her IEP, kind of the year-end roundup of the IEP, they were all really surprised. And her EA had told me when this was all happening that she told might have been another teacher, another EA, I'm not sure. And the teacher didn't believe her. And she showed her and the teacher was shocked. And so when we had the IEP review, I said, like, let's aim high. Like, don't think our kids can't do something. Yep. And so for me, that was really exciting because Ainsley always just shows people. And, when we started school, there was a lot of reluctance for her to go full time because she wasn't a great walker. She was a really late walker. And then we had a special meeting with all these important people and they wanted to go see her walk and they put the walker out, which I was so against. And Ainsley, they put her in the walker and then she just walked away from it. So I said, nope. Just show them, girl. So so she's doing really well. She can swim, she loves going to the park and, our kids can do anything. It might take them a little longer or a different way. I mean, she's not a great swimmer, but she can swim half a length of the pool.
That's more than I can do because I don't even know how to swim. So
there you go.
We were mentioning about the walking, and I found this is a really interesting part of Ainsley's life because, talking about presumed competency, like we need to assume that our kids can do this. Can you talk a little bit about the experience Ainsley had with her awesome PT and how the PT's approach and presuming competency actually really did help Ainsley learn how to walk?
Of course, yeah. So Ainsley we're at her 4th birthday party and she's it's in November. And I've been like trying for like a year. We'd go up and down the halls and up and down the stairs every single night, but she wouldn't do it by herself. I knew she could do it and we'd walk to the park, but she just wouldn't let go of my hand. And then at her birthday party, she was walking back and forth between the tables and everyone's cheering. And I'm going, yes, we're going to be walking by Christmas. She never did it again. And I go, oh my gosh. And so I contacted our support worker that I just mentioned, Jen, and she got us in to see the fabulous Brenda Horton. And we went there on this really snowy day. I wasn't even going to go because I didn't have snow tires. And Jen came and got us on a Saturday afternoon and took us there. And the first thing Brenda told me, she says, she's going to walk. And I remember crying. And within 3 weeks, she had her walking.
Wow.
Independently on her own. And, the sessions were hard. Ainsley would be crying. I'd be crying. I'd be in the car crying. It was hard, but I knew I had to know that Brenda knew what she was doing and I had to have complete trust in her. Yeah. And she did it. And, she goes, I'm possibly just as stubborn, if not more than Ainsley. And I think that's what worked. Yeah. And, and they just started by Brenda and another physio, just Ainsley walking 1 or 2 steps in between. And then they just kept going farther and farther apart until, she realized there was nothing to hold on to and she just did it.
Wow.
And Brenda's the same physio that we go to swim physio for. Obviously we haven't been going because of COVID, but I'm looking forward to it resuming hopefully soon. And she got her swimming, and I've told many parents of kids with Down syndrome or even different abilities to go see Brenda because she is a true miracle worker and she only deals with kids. And, she often deals with kids with these really rare diagnoses and she
knows her stuff.
Yeah, she definitely knows her stuff. And I hope she never retires.
One thing that stands out to me for Ainsley, and I think it's kind of the same for a lot of our kids, is finding the way for them to show what they know or what they can do. And it's like with her spelling and her doing her math, that skill was in there, and it's about finding how can we set things up, and the onus is on everybody else who's with her to figure out a way that she can demonstrate it. And you got to have your right team with you. But yeah, I mean, Ainsley's very capable You know that. I know that. But people make the wrong assumptions about her, I think, based on how much she might look at you or how long she'll interact with you in an activity that you choose that might be boring to her. And then she's like, well, this is not my thing. I don't want to do this. And then that's it. And people kind of leave it. And yeah, I think it's a good lesson for kind of all therapists out there you got to put the work in to find the way, the avenue that's going to be interesting and
especially
exciting.
with our students too. Because I mean, we know that our individuals with Down syndrome learn best when we incorporate preferences, you know, like all those very key learning strategies and learning strengths of our people with Down syndrome. But I think you kind of have to customize it to them in order to, and it doesn't mean that you have to customize everything forever. It's just, especially in the early years when you're really learning,
and when the skills are new.
And the skills are new. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And especially if there's somebody new working with Ainsley, then, you know, I'm sure I know Mary, we've had these conversations with Mary many times, like every new school year or new school teacher, you know, or whoever.
Or when I was new with her,
when
she
we
was
were
like,
new with her. Yeah.
I'm not going to show you my skills. And I was like, but I know that you have them. So we will find them.
We'll figure it out. Yeah.
But that's exactly it. Is I always tell like new therapists, Ainsley will test you. She will
Which
play
is smart,
you.
right?
Yeah. And I think that's part of, you know, the problem per se is that, you know, Ainsley, you know, people often just let her get away with things because she's cute, right?
She's so cute.
Sorry, I know I'm
She's
a little
extremely
biased.
charming.
And,
she is,
you know, and so people just, you know, I said, just because she has Down syndrome, she doesn't get a pass.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and just don't let her get away with things. Like, you know, even trying, like, I know that she can talk in more than 1 or 2 words, right? But she knows that if she just says water, that
The water
often
will
people
show
just
up.
give it to her.
Yeah.
I said, but make her ask it for it in a whole sentence because she can do it. And she knows that. I don't have to work that hard. And if she can get away with it, she will.
Yeah, the expectation should be the same as any other kid her age, right? Like it shouldn't be any different. The support might be a bit different about how we teach her, but the expectation should always be the same.
Yes.
Yeah, agreed.
Exactly.
Let's go back a little bit to when Ainsley was younger. What are some of like a really great early childhood memory of Ainsley? Like what was she like as a baby, as a little toddler? Yeah. I would love to know what Ainsley was
I don't
like.
think I knew her at that age.
No. We didn't
I
start
think
coming till about, I'm trying to think how old Ainsley was. Maybe 4.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I didn't know
4,
her when she was
maybe
tiny.
5.
Because you were originally like seeing us in Surrey, I remember at one point or something,
We
right?
did do some speech in Surrey, but we were here prior to that, but then we couldn't get in. So then we were going to Surrey.
Yeah.
Ainsley, you know, she was always a really good baby. She was a real chunk when she was younger, you know, has always loved music and, you know, just, really, I mean, I don't have other children, you know, I have nieces and nephews to compare, but, you know, she was always a happy baby, a great sleeper. You know, we loved going to the park a lot and, you know, she loves the swings and you know, we've had a few tumbles from the swings, but yeah, you know, just, and also that has been a great opportunity for learning language at this park. And she loves the water. Like at our park, she loves to go down, like you have to go down a few steps to get to where the water park is. And I remember like, when in the early days of her walking, she'd always be gunning towards the stairs. Like, makes me nervous. Right? But she's always been an excellent climber. Like she loves to climb all the things at the park and she's never fallen. She makes my heart beat strongly when I see her climbing up these things. It scares me, but she's never fallen. And she, you know, she's always been a little bit of a monkey and just, you know, to me, a really awesome kid, you know? So yeah. And she loves cookies and chocolate and, you know, like, I guess like most kids, but her favorite food is mac and cheese.
Oh, okay. Like, yeah. Very good.
Classic.
Pasta.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to ask you a little bit about support within the DS community. You didn't come to us or you didn't know us right away, but we are also not the only aspect of support for parents who have kids with Down syndrome. Did you find other people that were kind of with you on the same road? Or how did you set yourself up for some support, if at all?
Well, we did have some early intervention through BOCCI, which is the Burnaby Association for Community Inclusion. And Jen was our support worker, and she was fantastic.
She sounds amazing.
Yeah, she just knows everybody. And we also had some support through the Center for Ability, but it was a bit spotty and it was challenging. It's changed now, but they didn't like it at the time if you were getting private therapy and then you were also getting therapy from there. And I kind of understand that, but I was trying to get speech therapy for Ainsley, and you can only get in every 2 to 3 weeks. And I think in 1 year, we went through 5 speech therapists.
They do have a lot of turnover.
So that was really challenging. And then just finding other moms. Like I started going to, it was our local play group, the Upside Down play group. And we first went when Ainsley was 7 months old. So it was kind of nice to find like your tribe, right? Other parents with kids around the same age. So that was one way. And just to start building like your community, your village, right? And, and then I found out about you guys. But, a lot of these therapies, they cost a lot of money. And, and Variety, they stepped up in a big way for Ainsley. And I'm really grateful for that. They've been just so generous. And then they gifted us a beautiful trike for Ainsley, which she loves. Dennis and her love to go out on that. I think Dennis likes to ride on the back of it more than anything. So yeah, it's all about like finding your people. Facebook is great, to get in and find like people from all over really. But, I think it's also great to find people locally because it just makes it easier and meet those other parents, moms mostly, obviously, for me. And then, because then you can share your resources locally. And, because a lot of people still don't even know about the DSRF.
I know.
Which sounds crazy to me, but, especially if you're not right in the local area, you may not, if you're a little bit farther out, you might not know about the DSRF, but you need to find those people. You need to find your support, people who understand what you're going through when the times are tough, and also for just resources like, the DSRF is great for speech. Go see Brenda for physio, go see Henna for OT or, so I found that has been big, I think it's really important to have your tribe, because I actually really feel those are the people that really know what it's like when you're in the trenches. You really know what you're going through. And, because some days it's really hard.
Some days it is trenches.
Yeah.
For sure.
Sometimes
for sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think there's huge value too in meeting some other families whose kids are roughly the same age, maybe a little bit older, a little bit younger, because you're kind of that person when other people have the younger babies and they kind of look at you and they're like, okay, she's doing it. Right? Like she still got it, especially when your babies are little and you're really unsure. It's so valuable to look ahead a little bit and say, they're having a happy life. Like this is possible. And I think that can continue as kids grow up and people can kind of give you the word of mouth down the line. Like, oh, this transition thing from high school is a big deal. Worth it to start very early, that kind of thing. It's way more valuable coming from other parents, I think, than random people from school or us or whatever.
Us even. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The lived experience is way different than the professional experience. So we can only say what we can, but you guys are the true holder of all the knowledge. So
we value your info greatly.
Yeah, well, we appreciate that for sure. Yeah. That's why it's like a team thing, right? I mean, that's why we pride ourselves at DSRF at being family centered. So, we want to help not only our clients, but help the families as well. So,
totally.
Yeah.
And you guys have 100%.
You had mentioned a little bit earlier about Ainsley's autism diagnosis. Can you talk a little bit about what did you see any red flags, or like how did that come about? You looking for that diagnosis? Did somebody else mention it?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what happened. I had a tiny little bit of concern because she liked to flap like a card or maybe a little pocket comb on her chin a lot. And I remember our OT at the time, it was before we started seeing you, Hannah. And I asked her, but I go, do you think that could be autism? Because that was my greatest fear, more than Down syndrome. And she goes, no, I think it's just a sensory thing. And in some respects, I do think she was right. I think Ainsley does have a lot of mouth sensory issues. Even today, she's always really hard on her chewies. But we had an assessment for the at-home program, and the woman kind of mentioned it there. She goes, "Have you talked to Sunny Hill?" And I'm going, "For what? Like, I don't know. Like, what do I need to know about Sunny Hill? Like, I don't know anything about them." And that's when I first heard it. And then actually we were at a presentation here at the DSRF, and the speaker kind of mentioned it, but I kind of discounted what she'd said, because she said, well, she's not being very social, but Ainsley couldn't walk at the time. So she couldn't, like, in the room, like where she was sitting, she couldn't readily move to where the kids were. And I don't think the women necessarily knew that. But that's kind of when I thought, oh, maybe I better get it checked and, you know, put in for the wait list. It was a year long. And I think we got in at exactly 1 year. But I wouldn't say she had a lot of the red flags. Like, I mean, yeah, she likes the lights and like things that spin, which apparently is a sign. I didn't know that at the time. And because one of the questions they asked me during the assessment was regression. And I've never seen any regression in Ainsley. But talking with other parents who have children with a dual diagnosis, I hear that like probably almost all the time, that there was significant regression in speech. It was one of the big flags. Like one woman said, I think her son wasn't diagnosed till about 8. And at 7, he just lost all his language. Like it sounded like he had been talking quite a bit. And I'm thinking that's so heartbreaking to lose that. But Ainsley's never had that. And then even though at the time when we got the diagnosis that it was so negative and so dire, and he said it was moderate to severe, you know, I didn't really necessarily agree with that, but I did find a really great consultant, which I think is key. It was hard to find someone who had experience with both autism and Down syndrome. And I emailed every single person on the list. Like it was over 100, and less than 50 got back to me, you know, and out of the ones that I did interview, which I think was 11, 2 had experience with both. And the one woman that we ended up getting was actually recommended to me. So, and that's worked out really well. And, you know, I think has made a huge difference. And, you know, I'd say Ainsley's really thriving. Like, and, you know, I'm not going to discount the autism diagnosis, and I'm not in denial of it, but she doesn't have a lot of the associated behaviors. Like she doesn't have the meltdowns or the tantrums. Not, I mean, all kids do, but it's not
nothing beyond.
It's not a big
it's
feature.
not prolific, and she transitions really well. So, you know, I feel really fortunate in that way. And, you know, I don't think it's severe, her autism. You know, I think it's maybe more moderate to mild. I don't know. I'm not the consultant and I'm not the doctor.
Well, it's a spectrum, right? So you could fall anywhere on there.
Yes.
So,
and I think, you know, you can move along that spectrum.
right.
So,
For sure.
And I think now they're even getting into more of a finer point thing where it's like it might be mild in areas A, B, C, and more moderate in area D.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot more complex than doctors used to explain, etc. And more nuanced, I guess, is the thing. Do you think having the autism diagnosis helped you in any way?
I would say in a weird way, yes.
Okay.
Because nobody wants that diagnosis, of course.
No.
But it opened up avenues to funding that I would not have had. And the therapies that Ainsley's really benefited from. She's really benefited from the ABA therapy, like greatly. And I was also able to get her toilet trained, which I certainly wouldn't have been able to afford on my own. But, you know, she came in 5 days, boom, done. I mean, it was a little rough after, don't get me wrong. Right. But, you know, Ainsley
leaps and bounds ahead of where you started.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And those opportunities probably would not have been presented to me without the diagnosis, you know, and then I was able to take her to music therapy. Again, something I wouldn't have been able to afford without the autism diagnosis. Again, I would prefer her not to have it.
Right.
But, you know, it is what it is. And you find acceptance somewhere in it, and you take all the resources that are given to you and you go with it. But again, getting a good team, I found, is what is so key to your child's success.
I think what you said about going through very arduous process of vetting 100 people to 50 people to 11 people. I mean, props to you, because that's huge. I mean, that's a full-time job.
It was horrible. Yeah.
You're the HR manager for your child. But it's probably worth it. Would you say it's worth it? Because you got the right person, you got the right fit. I mean, yeah, that's a lot of work. That's huge.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's a tricky conversation too, from a therapist's perspective, because I mean, I personally wouldn't feel super comfortable saying, oh, because they're doing this STEM, they may have autism. Because I feel like it's a very collaborative thing. Like I would always, if there was a client or I had a question, would always go to Marla or one of our other awesome SLPs at the DSRF, because they are looking at it from a different lens. But that conversation sometimes is very hard to broach with parents, because you don't want to, I had one mom say to me, she's like, I just got a handle on the Down syndrome, now I have to deal with the autism. So you don't want to add to a parent's plate. What, from your perspective, what advice could you give to therapists or teachers that are just like trying to figure out how to broach that conversation? Like, do you...
Gosh, that's a tough question. I mean, I think... it's very common in our kids. It's up to almost, I think it's 18% that could possibly have the dual diagnosis. So, I mean, it could almost be broached that way that, 1 in 5 of kids with Down syndrome could possibly have autism, and I know that Susan, actually on one of my podcasts, did a very good one on the dual diagnosis. And she talked a lot about the red and gray flags, which I think is really beneficial to parents. And that could be something you could tell parents to, because I'm sure you have it as a resource on your website to have a look at, because you're right. Like nobody wants to hear that your kid, oh yeah, I'm already dealing with Down syndrome and now I got to deal with autism, and I've talked with other parents with the dual diagnosis, and we all wish we could just take the autism away.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
You don't want that Down syndrome.
Yeah.
But if I could take the autism away, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's tricky, and I guess it's a bit challenging to broach it to parents, but early intervention is so key, right? And the earlier that they can get into those therapies and you can get a good team together, the better it will benefit your child, which I think is what has happened with Ainsley. Like I would almost love to go back to that doctor who was so dire and just say, look, and and I don't think he even knew much about Down syndrome. And he said they were starting to see more kids with Down syndrome. But I'm thinking, but what are you doing about that? Like, are you learning anything about Down syndrome and how the traits of autism and Down syndrome can overlap greatly? Like I don't know if he really knew that or understood that, and that was part of my frustration is I'm going, I know Down syndrome. I don't know if you really know Down syndrome, but and
you kind of need to, because they do overlap broadly. Absolutely. I would say that conversation, we think your child might have autism, it's worth getting an assessment conversation, is one of the most serious conversations that I ever have as a parent. And we take it so extremely seriously because we know that our parents have already grieved or are still grieving. And it is not something to just be casually tossed out into the wind at all. And I would say we tend more towards sitting on that info for a long time, or that suspicion, to really determine if it's worth it to bring it up to a family. And, it's in no way is it the first time you see somebody stimming that you're like, wow,
exactly. Yeah.
That's probably autism at all. Yeah. And we usually ask around to several colleagues and see what they've noticed, what they've seen, because it's a really big deal. It's a really huge, huge thing. But on the other hand, we weigh that access to really valuable, mostly it's therapy, time, equipment, etc., support.
And we've had there have been a few parents who are like, hold on, I'm noticing. Like I think similar
sometimes
to you,
parents will come
they're just
to
like,
us.
what do you? Yeah, and then sometimes parents will ask, and then that's an opening as well. But it is. I 100% agree with Marla. It is not something that we just casually would ever throw out and say, hey, have you ever thought about an autism diagnosis? Because it is just not. Yeah, it's not.
And you could broach it as you may not want to be thinking about this, but it might be important to just look into and sort of go from there.
Yeah. I had a parent that I had this conversation with, and she said that she thought about it because to her, another agency had just written it in a report, hadn't even talked to her about it. So then she obviously very like upset called me, and then we tried, and eventually she took her time. She said, you know what? I realized that it's not going to change who my kid is. It's just going to provide, like you said, just more resources and more support and more people on the team. So that's just her perspective. Obviously, every other parent has their own perspective, but yeah, it's not an easy conversation to have or to listen to from your perspective as a parent too, to have to go through that.
No. And I think one of the silver linings of the extremely long wait list is that you have that time that you talked about before to prepare yourself to look into it if you're ready, and you don't have to be ready right away. It's not like somebody saying, we think your child might have autism, and then the next week you get this assessment and bam, then you have a life-changing event. But I wish it weren't quite so long, that wait list. It's a lot. It's a lot of information to take on for sure.
So my next question I was going to ask you was, when you were mentioning about getting the diagnosis of Down syndrome, this is another, Mary, can you give us some advice question? Or give her, we of course have many parents that will contact us right away being like, hey, we just got a diagnosis of Down syndrome. What do we do now? So we can prepare them from our perspective in terms of how we can help. What would you say to parents that are trying to deal with that piece of news when they hear it?
I would first give them a hug and tell them it's going to be okay. And congratulations. And I remember when I talked to a mom shortly before Ainsley was born, and the first thing she said to me was congratulations. And to me, it just seemed so weird. Like, congratulations, because I'm having a baby with Down syndrome. But I understand now why that is so important, because when she was born, I wanted her to be celebrated. And, you know, I remember all my family came and my nieces and nephews, like everyone was excited. Everyone at my workplace, I mean, most of them did not know that she had Down syndrome, but everyone was eagerly awaiting her arrival. And, you know, I had a person at work, one of my village, you know, send out the message about Ainsley, and it was from me. And I said, and she has Down syndrome, and I'm fine with that. And I hope that you will continue to show me all the love and support that I know that you have for me and my girl. And they did, you know, and I think just being positive with parents and just saying, I know what you're going through and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Because I think parents will always ask us like, okay, what about, they kind of want us to see into the future a little bit. And it's a very hard thing. I've had a recent conversation with a parent who came to visit us on just a Friday. They're like, I just got a diagnosis, you know, and it's a very important conversation. And it's something that you want to, you know, give them space to express their concerns, because they're very valid concerns. But still not, like, I don't want to paint a very rosy picture either, because of course, even typically developing kids, you will go through your ups and downs, but it is one of those things where you want to present the possibilities, the great possibilities, rather than, and I know, and I'm sure you would agree that in doctors' offices, a lot of the parents that we've talked to, the conversation is always like, can't do this, won't do this, shouldn't be able to do
that won't happen.
Or won't happen. So just trying to find a balance on that you want to give them reasonable expectations, but also
and positive stories. And, you know, and like I said, we have a great pediatrician, and no one was ever like that. Like I haven't really encountered that too much with the medical professionals. You know, the prenatal part was a different story. Like the genetic counselors were the worst, you know, kept pushing towards, you know, termination. I said, it's not an option. It's not a choice here. And they knew that from the beginning. And I'm going, why are you asking me that? But it's also allowing the parents to have the chance to grieve. You're grieving what you were expecting. And now you've got some news that you're getting something a little different, and it's okay. It's okay to grieve, you know, but we're all here for you. We're all here to support you. And we're all eagerly awaiting for your little bub to arrive.
Yeah.
And I think when you're in those dark days, you kind of really need to hear that people are still excited for you. Because I remember one friend, she goes, Mary, you're having a baby. And that is something to be celebrated.
It's a good friend.
Such a great friend. Yeah. For sure.
She's absolutely right. I think that, that's what I was trying to say before is I think it, in the long hospital stays, the fact that you have a brand new precious baby gets lost somehow with all of the tests and things that are important, but it's your baby, and that's the valuable piece of that big life change.
And then to tell expectant parents, you're having a baby, and all babies, they need to be fed, changed, hugged, and loved.
Exactly.
Yep. Across the board. Yeah.
Yeah. They need their little naps, all of that.
Yes, exactly.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah. You also had mentioned your partner, Dennis, and you said that him and Ainsley just have a great relationship. Do you have a cute little story or like a little, tell us what do they like to do together other than riding on her trike?
Well, I don't know when it was, but I started this silly game called Hot Lava, where you can't step on the floor.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So Ainsley always is wanting hot lava, which means she gets a piggyback. And so,
of course. Okay. Got it.
So Dennis is always being suckered into a piggyback all the time. And, they love to just, snuggle. Like Ainsley, I see them on the couch sitting together. Unfortunately, recently she's been coming into our bed every night, but the last week has been pretty good actually. But they like to snuggle together. They sleep the same. I think they just love hanging out with each other. And I know, like I said about Ainsley's bike, they like to ride the bike together and swimming. They definitely love to go swimming together. So
that's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm so glad about it. Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast and where people can find it and what kind of things are on it?
And how did you come to?
Yeah, why did you
start a podcast? It's an awesome one, but I'm just curious,
why did I start?
Why did you start it? Yeah.
Well, the reason it was started is, one day I was doing a fundraiser with cookies at a farmer's market, and my friend Ron, who's now my co-host, he would always come down whenever I was doing the farmer's markets, and we're just chatting, and he said, have you ever thought of doing a podcast? I think at that time I'd listened to one podcast. I said, no, I thought about doing a blog, but I never have time and to sit down and write anything. He goes, well, I'll help you. I said, okay. Neither one of us knew what that entailed. And so we sat on it for a while, and then we met up one rainy Saturday afternoon, I think it was. And we kind of discussed what it would look like and went over some different names. And finally, I came up with T21 Mom because I thought it was sort of fitting. And it just went from there. So, I love hearing other people's stories, like what, different things they've been through or what they're doing, and also I've had lots of different professionals like you, Hannah, has been on and Eleanor, and gosh, I think almost half the staff here. Marla, you haven't been on.
Someday.
And you also have families from around the world on your podcast, right? Just with different experiences.
Yes, we've had, gosh, I was just looking at it today. I think we're at 67 episodes, I think.
Yeah.
Can't even remember now. It's a lot. And and it's being heard all over the world, which is really cool, as I'm sure you can tell from your own podcast as well. And we've had a few people. I'm trying to think now. I've had my friend Sharon on. She is from Britain, and I've had people from the States. Recently, there was a young girl. Her name is Riley Kate, and she's all of 16 years old. And she started a nonprofit back in November 2020 that gives welcome baskets to children with Down syndrome who've been adopted, and she's doing all these amazing things. And I love hearing all these different amazing stories. She doesn't have a sibling with Down syndrome. She just grew up because she had a child in her class. I think it was in kindergarten or grade 1 who had autism. And she said every year there was a child in her class who was a little bit different. And she said that shows that inclusion works. And when I heard that, I thought, yes, that's so amazing. So I love just, sharing my experiences, was sharing other people's stories, but also sharing different professionals, their experience. Like, so because there's so much need in our community, like for example, the toilet training. I've had Katie on like 3 times because I don't think she realized that there was such a need in the Down syndrome community for toilet training, because now that's all she does for her practice. But also I read about it all the time, about people need that information. And I thought this is a great way that you can get that information. So I'm open to all different types of stories and whatever people want to hear.
Great. So to end our episode, I would love to know what your hopes are for Ainsley's future.
Oh gosh, I want her to be accepted and to find something that she has joy in. You know, my little dream is to have like a little bakery or a little bistro and make lots of cookies and hire people like Ainsley who have Down syndrome. And I want her to have choices in her life, like where she wants to live, how she wants to live. Does she want to live with us forever? Does she want to live on her own? You know, I want her to be able to have that opportunity in life. And, you know, and my goal is just to try to help that, for her to have the best life that she can. I want us to go and travel and do lots of amazing trips and do amazing things. And that's what I hope for her.
Yeah. That's lovely.
Very, very well said.
Great. Very well said. Yeah.
It's been a huge pleasure to have you on, Mary. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.